Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. The Southern Alliance for Clean Energy is pleased to host the Southeast Coastal Climate Network's webinar series. On behalf of SACE and the Southeast Coastal Climate Network, I'd like to thank you for being with us today. It is your interest and support that make our work possible. My name is Erin Cameron, and I'm the SACE Development and Outreach Coordinator, and I will be the acting facilitator for today's webinar, Caring for God's Creation Through Climate Action. All of your lines will remain muted throughout the presentation, but we encourage you to please chat in your questions using the question option on your control panel. We will then answer your questions at the end of the presentation. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Chris Carnevale, SACE Coastal Climate and Energy Coordinator and Manager of the Southeast Coastal Climate Network. Chris?
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, everyone, for being on the line with us today. Let's see, Erin, there we go. I was going to say, start the slideshow. There it is. So thanks, everyone, for being on the line today. I'm Chris Carnevale, and I'm the manager of the Southeast Coastal Climate Network. As you can see on the current slide, the Southeast Coastal Climate Network is a coalition of individuals and organizations spanning the coastal Southeast who are working on coastal responses to climate change. We have members as far north as Maryland and as far west as Louisiana. And the purpose of the network is to bring voices together, to trade information, and to synergize our efforts. SECCN is hosted under Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Our largest tool is our group site website, which is an online platform that enables members to send group emails, post discussion topics or relevant news to discussion boards, and use a shared group calendar. If you're interested in joining the network and using these tools, please just visit the website that's on the current slide, seccn.groupsite.com, and click Join this group now. For those of you who are on this webinar and who are already members, I want to encourage you to use those tools to help you get your message out. The purpose of the group is to encourage collaboration, so just know that everybody else on the network is a receptive audience right at your fingertips. Another tool we have is our webinar series, of which today's webinar is a part. Today we're joined by faith leaders from throughout our region for a presentation on caring for God's creation through climate action. We have on the line today Reverend Alexis Chase from Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, Reverend Michael McLean from Creation Justice Ministries in South Carolina, and Penny Hooper from North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. So we're going to start with Reverend Alexis. Reverend Alexis joined the Georgia Interfaith Power and Light staff in September 2008 as the Outreach and Communications Director and was hired as the Executive Director in February 2010. She earned her Master of Divinity from San Francisco Theological Seminary in 2006. Alexis is a transitional deacon in the Episcopal Church and serves as a deacon at Church of Our Savior. With that, I'll turn it over to Reverend Alexis.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for having me. You can actually go directly to the next slide. As he said, I'm the Executive Director of Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, otherwise known as GIPL, and we are celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. And our mission statement is that we are a statewide nonprofit that in response to climate change and environmental injustice, we engage communities of faith in stewardship of God's creation through worship, education, and the sustainable generation and efficient use of energy. And one of the first things that we did 10 years ago when we were first founded was that we asked ourselves the question, why should congregations respond to climate change? And so every single thing that we do, every single program that we run, every single conversation we have or sermon we preach or educational class that we teach is based on the 4 faith principles we came up with when we were first founded 4 years ago. And with the help of people of a divergent number of faith traditions, we came up with these faith traditions, and they're grounded in our scriptural, theological, and historical traditions as people of faith. So next slide. Our first faith principle is our interconnectedness. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, and you are dust, and to dust you shall return. The way we look at it is that we are interconnected. We are all dust, and to dust we shall return. We are all brothers and sisters with everyone on the planet, not just the people down the street, but the people across the globe All of those people who are affected by climate change, the ones who are least likely to cause it are the ones who are most likely to feel the effects of it. And so because we are interconnected, because as humans and because as people of faith we are connected on this planet, we are required to respond to climate change in significant ways, not only in our own lives, but within our faith communities. Next slide. Our next one is justice. As people of faith, we are required to seek justice for our brothers and sisters. And this is my favorite passage of Scripture about justice. Is it not enough for you to feed on the good pasture, but you must tread down with your feet the rest of the pasture? And what I often hear when I present in faith communities is that I'm asking people to live like the biblical example of John the Baptist, which he lived in the woods and ate nothing but honey and bugs and lived completely off the grid. And what I say to people is that that's not what we're requiring of you. What we're requiring of you and what your faith requires of us is to seek justice because, and this is a map of our watersheds here in Georgia, because we are all upstream from someone and all of us are downstream from someone else. And so all of us, you can eat from the good pasture, you can drink from the clear water, but must you screw it up for everyone else? And so because as people of faith, we are required to seek justice for our brothers and sisters, this part of our faith traditions, it inspires us to respond to climate change in significant ways. Next slide, please. Our next one is stewardship. And so all faith traditions have a mantra that says we are called to be good stewards of our time, talents, and our treasures. And when I think about some of our treasures, I think creation is one of our treasures. But the interesting thing about creation being one of our treasures is that it's not ours. We didn't make it, we didn't create it, and so we don't own it. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. There are a number of Psalms that give praise to God in that God created everything. In the Genesis story, the first conversation God has isn't with us. The first conversation God has is with all of creation and all the things that God has created. And so because God created it, because it's not ours, and because our faith traditions require it of us, we are required to be good stewards of our resources. And that's not just creation, but that's of our own lives and of each other. We are required to be good stewards of everything God has given us. Next slide, please. And so our last faith principle, which is the easiest one for me, is awe. When we look at the Psalms, there are also a number of them that talk about how the heavens are telling the glory of God and the firmament, which is all of the earth, proclaims God's handiwork. This is I think it's Amicalola, or no, it's Apalachicola, one of the swamps. And paddling through those swamps, you can, or even looking out your own window, I mean, it's sunny and beautiful here, and I look outside, and it's easy to be in awe of what God has created. And so when I look outside, when I look at a tree, when we are aware of our surroundings, it reminds us that we are to keep it good. At the end of the Genesis story, God looks around and looks at everything that God has created, including us, and says, it is good. And so because God said that it is good, it is our requirement to keep it good, to be in awe of what God has done for us and for all of us. And so those are our four faith principles: interconnectedness, stewardship, justice, and awe. And because of all of those, all of Gippel's work is grounded in those traditions that call us forward to care for creation and respond to the threat of climate change in significant ways. So next slide. And so what we require of our congregations after they learn about these four faith principles and they become an intrinsic part of their faith tradition, we ask them to, the response to climate change, to become part of their purpose and their prayer. One of the things that we forget is that all of our faith traditions have a tradition of prayer, and so we forget to pray about it. We forget to pray for help in responding to climate change, as well as for encouragement, and we forget that it is our purpose. As people of faith, it is our purpose in the world to respond to what God is asking us to do, which is to do justice, to be good stewards, to remember that we are connected to our brothers and sisters across the planet. And so we say that it is our purpose and our prayer to respond to climate change. Next slide. And so once it becomes a part of our purpose and our prayer, it then becomes part of our proclamation and our practice. And so we can proclaim that we are being good stewards. We can proclaim that we are seeking justice for our brothers and sisters when we do the work necessary to put it into practice. And these are a couple of pictures of the practices that some of our partner congregations make. The one on the top left is St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church here in Tucker, which has a race for grace. They have a foot race every year that is a zero waste event. And it's become a certified green race. The one on the top right is St. Gregory's Episcopal Church at Athens. They installed solar panels. The one on the bottom right is the Agape Garden at Trinity Presbyterian, and so forth. So it becomes, we can proclaim it through our practices. So it's not just about what we say, but it's also about what we do, so that in our own lives, within our communities, and within our faith communities, we are responding to climate change by embracing sustainability. So next slide, please. And so the way GIPL encourages congregations to do this is through our Creation Wise program. We have our own green certification program, and it's Georgia-based, but it can be used anywhere in the country, and we'd be happy to share it. All of these things are free to download from our website, which is gipl.org. And so the Creation Wise Green Certification Program has 5 categories within it. PowerWise is our energy efficiency program for congregations in which we help them do professional energy audits. We give grants for congregations to embrace energy efficiency, and we have a solar loan fund to help them install solar panels so that they can create their own clean, green energy. We also have a WasteWise program, which has classes, and congregations can do their own waste audit, because we tend not to think what we're throwing away. And so we help congregations think through, what are you putting in your trash, and how can you decrease the amount of trash? DirtWise is our sustainable gardening guide and food guide, which has 10 classes, worship resources, and a guide to how to build your own raised bed garden. And then there's WaterWise, which in Georgia is incredibly important. Not that they're all not important, but right now we're very concerned about our water usage. And so this helps congregations do their own water audit, so they can walk through their congregations, see how much water they're using, and use less. And finally, we have BuyWise. And BuyWise is about thinking, where do we buy our stuff from? What do we need to not buy? How can we sustainably purchase things? How can we clean in a green way? And so we encourage congregations across the life of their congregations, because it's not just about how we produce energy and how we save energy, but it's about everything that we do in our lives. And so our ultimate goal is, and this is my last slide, is to live sustainably. We encourage our congregations to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so this is an intrinsic part of our faith tradition, is that we encourage our partner congregations to embrace sustainability, embrace stewardship, be in awe of creation, seek justice for our brothers and sisters, and remember that we are connected on this planet to everyone, not just our friends and relatives that live near us, but our brothers and sisters across the planet. And so that's what GIPL does, and I'd love to help anyone and everyone who wants to embrace sustainability in a significant way in their faith communities. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Reverend Chase. Our next presenter will be Penny Hooper. Penny and her husband Mark have resided in a small fishing village on the coast of North Carolina for 40 years, where they have run a mom-and-pop commercial crabbing and clamming operation and raised 2 children. Penny retired from teaching biology at Carteret Community College in 2010 and has dedicated much of her time to volunteer work since then. She was awarded the North Carolina Governor's Award for Volunteer Service in 2013. Penny joined North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light in 2008 as a steering committee member. A year later, she became the steering committee secretary and hasn't missed a beat since. Her roles with NCIPL include, but are not limited to, secretary of the steering committee, outreach working group member, Climate Justice Tour 2010 organizer, and Sierra Club liaison. In 2012, Penny helped organize an extremely successful offshore wind energy forum at Carteret Community College. She has also helped organize the local events surrounding the international Hands Across the Sand protest against offshore oil drilling for several years. In all her efforts, Penny keeps us hopeful that North Carolina can and will respond positively to climate change. Now I'll turn it over to Penny.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to Reverend Alexis. It's a pleasure to be with 2 clergy people today as a layman, and I appreciate greatly hearing about what Georgia IPL is doing. Our work in North Carolina is very similar to what the IPL is doing in Georgia, but we are under the umbrella of the North Carolina Council of Churches, As you can see on the first slide, we offer a religious response to global warming. We work with faith communities to address the causes and the consequences of climate change and to promote practical solutions. The three areas that we work in are education, outreach, and public policy advocacy. In North Carolina, we began this work in 2000 as an eco-justice working group. It was renamed the Climate Connection in 2001, and in 2005 we joined the National IPL organization. There are interfaith power and light organizations in 38 states, and we were the 16th state to join. We renamed our group in 2007 North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light. I come to this work from an educational background, as Chris shared with you, and I spent many years in the college classroom teaching the science of climate change. I was trying to convince people through their heads that this is a serious problem and it requires a serious response. If you would put up the next slide, please. This is a quote from Bill McKibben. I'm sure many people on this call recognize the name as being associated with 350.org. That organization is a secular organization that focuses on the fact that we need to pull our CO2 levels back to 350 parts per million. As many of you probably know, we're over 390 parts per million now. The livable standards that we have would work much better with 350 parts per million. This is a number, and this number appeals to the mind or the head. But as you can see from this quote, Bill McKibben understands the value of both the heart and the spirit in this battle that we have ahead. He says we need a movement to combat climate change. We need it fast, and we need it to involve as many congregations as possible. And that's where I'm at right now, is trying to involve as many congregations as possible and making this switch from educating through the head to working through the heart. I feel that we need to have people recognize their moral responsibility to the next generation. Reverend Alexis did a beautiful job of presenting the four areas of our faith principles, and I couldn't agree more with her that every faith has this moral responsibility as one of its basic tenets to not destroy the earth that is providing us sustenance. Next slide, please. So what do we do? Well, North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light offers hope-filled solutions to climate change in these three areas: outreach, education, and advocacy. We also have a web page where you can go and download any of these this information that I'm presenting today. It is ncipl.org. And we have the resources there to help you put together your own program for outreach, education, and advocacy. In our state, we work with advocacy through identifying important issues and opportunities at not only a state level but also a federal level. We have energy efficiency legislation both at a federal level and a state level that we're working on and hoping to get congregations to pull behind changing the way that politics works in terms of climate change. In outreach, we have done a lot of work with just encouraging a positive action on the part of the churches and congregations that we deal with. We were there for Moral Mondays in the state legislature. We write opinion editorials and to our local newspaper and get the message out that this is not just a science question, that this is a moral question. What kind of earth are we going to leave for our children? So let me talk a little bit more about those things. This next slide is a little bit detailed. I apologize for that, but I wanted to get it all on one slide, and we just have a few minutes here. So the way that NCIPL breaks down our creation care programs is into three areas very similar to what GIPL does. We focus on energy, on food, and on worship. The energy program that we have is called Empowered, and this energy program allows us to go to a congregation and share with them through an energy audit ways that they can save energy, reduce their utility bills, and lower their carbon footprint. I have a few facts here for you. Numbers aren't all bad, right? If all churches and houses of worship decrease their energy usage by just 10%, an estimated $200 million would be saved per year. That's money that could go towards our missions work, towards anything that you wanted to do within your congregation other than pay the electric bill. It would be like taking 400,000 cars off the road. We have the capacity to make change, and we have the ability to do this, as well as the moral requirement that we do this. It's not just this would be a great way to save money. Our religion tells us that this is what we should be doing. So Empowered also works with solar panels for churches and alternative energies. We have a solar energy clearinghouse, which will take congregations through the ins and outs of how you can put solar panels on your house of worship without having to pay a dime. There are people out there who, not people, but industries out there who need the tax credits that we can't qualify for, because as houses of worship, we are 401c3s and we don't pay taxes, so we can't get tax write-offs. But there are industries who are willing to pay ahead for the solar panels and to allow churches to put them up and then use them and give the tax write-off to the individuals. This is a complicated situation. It's not easy, and we have had the advantage of having people on our steering committee who could work through the details of that and present it in a way that a board of trustees could understand and could maybe move forward in terms of using alternative energy in their house of worship. So we want to share with others what everybody's been doing in terms of this is a good idea for my congregation, maybe your congregation could benefit. So we also put up on our website success stories from these North Carolina congregations. And again, you can access that. It's open to everybody, ncipl.org. The second area, in addition to energy, that we focused on is food, and we call this Sacred Foodscapes, making the food, faith, climate change connection. As most of you probably know on this call, the story of our food and what we choose to eat, where it comes from, how far it has to be traveled before it gets to your table, how it's produced, all of that has a huge impact on climate change. We want congregations to explore growing, purchasing, eating, and cooking food in a way that reduces our collective greenhouse gas footprint. We have the materials to teach that to your congregation. We have ways for you to partner with your local food network, ways for you to support just and sustainable and local agriculture and aquaculture. So all of this is day-to-day things that individuals can do, and that's part of our goal, is to teach the individuals in your congregation about ways that they can make small differences, which if we add them all together wind up being huge differences. We don't want people to feel powerless. We want them to take responsibility and be empowered by their faith. And that empowerment brings you hope that we can make changes. Hope that is present because we can pray about it, because we have a higher power that we can choose to call upon in these times. And hope is not is available to us. And when you work in the environmental movement, this is something that many folks who just focus on the head suffer from burnout. But when you work through your faith, that is not what happens. What happens is that you become filled with hope that we can make a difference. And that gets me to the last one, which is worship. Reverend Alexis put it in the form of awe. I put it in the form of empowering and strengthening us to do this work, to honor creation and to reach the heart and soul of our congregants with Earth Sabbath celebrations, with special sermons and writings and faith-based resources. Our national organization, Interfaith Power and Light, encourages folks to do a preach-in on climate change every February around Valentine's Day, and to send Valentines to our senators and representatives, encouraging them to love the earth and to care for creation. This is what we can offer that's different from the secular point of view in terms of climate change. We can offer these hope-filled solutions and, like I said, work through the heart rather than the head. Next slide, please. Excuse me, that's the end there. I wanted to say one more thing, and that is that caring about creation, as we've already discussed, is a basic tenet of all faiths. And because of that, we all need to take this responsibility for incorporating creation care into both our religious and our personal lives. And that happens on a daily basis. I hope you will take the opportunity to visit our website, find out more information about North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, and I'll be happy at the end of this presentation to address any questions that anybody might have about this effort that we're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Penny. That was wonderful. Our next presenter is Reverend Michael McLean. Michael McLean picked up the reins of national presidential politics with both the Dick Gephardt for President 2004 campaign and the Joe Biden for President 2008 campaign. Under his leadership, he refocused state field operations through his extensive network of political and ecumenical contacts. Reverend McLean also served as one of Senator Tommy Moore's top aides in his quest for the office of Governor of South Carolina. He remains a valuable political advisor and is called upon frequently for his political expertise. Reverend Michael McLean is an ordained missionary Baptist and was educated at the Andersonville Theological Seminary in Camilla, Georgia, Hood Theological Seminary in Salisbury, North Carolina, Livingstone College in Salisbury, North Carolina, and Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Reverend Michael McLean is recognized in the Southeast as one of the most influential voices for environmental hazards impacting African American families, and currently serves as the Southeast Regional Field Coordinator for Creation Justice Ministries' Eco Justice Program, headquartered in Washington, D.C. Reverend McLean has worked in the Southeast since 2008 to educate and move to action African American faith leaders and congregations to get involved for the fight for eco-justice within their cities and states. Now I'll turn it over to Reverend McLean.
Good morning, Chris. Good morning to each and every one of you. As he said, I am Michael McLean. It is an honor to be a part of this forum, and I want to begin by saying that we are grateful for being asked to come. In 2004, the Congressional Black Caucus began to review climate change data, which showed the dark plight that climate change is having and will have on people of color in the United States. They went to their foundation, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, to find out what could be done, how could they get the word out about the environmental issues that so adversely affected African Americans. They remembered that the historical African American denominations are part of the National Council of Churches. In 2013, our name changed from National Council of Churches Environmental Justice Organization to Creation Justice Organization, Creation Justice Ministries. We still do the same work with the same denominations. We represent 37 denominations, 285,000 congregations, and 65 plus million congregants throughout the United States. Since 2008, we have worked heavily in South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, Virginia, and Georgia to educate and to move faith communities to action, educate them and move them to action. As the Reverend Alexis says, we operate on 4 principles. Our 4 faith principles on global warming are justice, strive for justice, and acknowledge that global warming impacts already fall and will continue to fall most heavily on people around the world who are least able to mitigate the impacts, the poor and the vulnerable populations in the United States and developing countries. Secondly, stewardship. Heed the call to be faithful stewards and caretakers of God's creation by limiting the future impacts of global warming on God's earth. Thirdly, sustainability. Ensure that the efforts to curb global warming prevent further environmental and societal tragedies. As people of faith, we are guided by the value of sustainability. Sustainability requires that we enable biological and social systems that nurture and support life, not to deplete or poison. And fourthly, sufficiency. In a world of finite resources, for all of us to have enough requires that those among us who have more than enough will need to address our patterns of acquisition and consumption. We cannot achieve significant reductions in global warming emissions unless we make changes in our lifestyles and particularly in our energy consumption. Ethnic faith groups and environmental issues. Our rich religious traditions tell us that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and call on us to live out our moral responsibility to protect the earth for our children and future generations. We also are called to serve and protect the poor and the helpless, and to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. It is the poor and vulnerable who are the most sensitive to the repercussions of decisions about our energy future. We urge you to give voice to those who are often unheard. They are destroying God's earth. African Americans are likely to live near a power plant or waste site. African Americans account for 17% of people living within 5 miles of a power plant waste site. Asthma attacks send African Americans to the emergency room at least 3 times the rate, or 174.3 visits per 10,000 population of whites, which are at 59.4. African Americans are hospitalized for asthma at more than 3 times the rate of our Caucasian brothers and sisters. The death rate from asthma for African Americans is twice that of our white counterparts. 68% of African Americans live within a 35-mile radius of a coal-fired power plant. African Americans are disproportionately affected by power plant emissions because we are concentrated in large urban centers. We suffer higher rates of asthma, and we share an historical bond with developing worlds where climate change threatens already weak and overburdened economies. From this perspective, power plant cleanup is elevated on a long list of social injustices toward people of color. The Bible says in Genesis 2:19 and 19, "So out of the ground of the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to the human to see what he would call them. And whatever the human called every living creature, that was its name." Mercury pollution affects African Americans. African Americans are avid fishermen. In fact, in 2006, there were more than 1.8 million licensed African American anglers who spent over $813 million on fishing trips and equipment. 1/3 of African Americans are active anglers and eat fish more often than eat larger portions of fish than whites. Unfortunately, exposure to mercury is directly related to the amount and type of fish consumed. So all of these factors add to a higher mercury exposure and consequently higher risk for health effects. Again, poor inner city communities are disproportionately affected by a legacy of lead pollution caused mostly by the use of cheap, long-lasting lead paint. Heat-related stress and illnesses. A study of the 15 largest U.S. cities found that climate change would increase heat-related deaths by at least 90%. Most African Americans live in inner cities, which tend to be about 10 degrees warmer than surrounding areas. In fact, studies have shown people of color are twice as likely to die of a heat wave. Solomon says in Proverbs, "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." More than half of all African Americans live in areas with air quality that does not meet federal standards. Some power plant air toxics may be absorbed through the skin from direct contact with contaminated water or soil. Children can be exposed to power plant toxics by ingesting contaminated soil while playing. Again, Jeremiah says, "For I will restore health unto thee, I will heal thee of thy wounds, saith the Lord, because they called thee an outcast, saying, This is Zion, whom no man seeketh after." Emission tests at coal-fired power plants have detected 67% air toxics. Of these, 55 are known to be either neurotoxic, toxic to the nervous system, or developmental toxics, damaging to the human developmental process. In addition, 24 have also been characterized as known, possible, or probable human carcinogens. In just 1 year, power plants released 78 million pounds of developmental and neurological toxins to the air and surface waters. Heat wave mortality rates of African Americans were roughly 50% higher than that of our white counterparts. African American workers suffer more than others economically from climate change. For example, they are more likely to be laid off due to economic instability caused by events triggered by climate change, such as drought. As consumers, African Americans use fewer products that produce carbon emissions than other Americans. Moving the economy away from fossil fuel dependency would create greater economic stability for our nation and significantly benefit low-income African American communities through job creation and labor force stability. Climate change on community of colors. The poor, indigenous people, and communities of color will feel disproportionate impacts of climate change in 3 major areas: health, economic, and culture disruption. For example, expected health effects include an increase in pollution-related respiratory diseases, deaths and illnesses due to thermal extremes, and cases of infectious diseases from carriers such as mosquitoes, ticks, rats, and algae. Yes, the heat is on. Increased temperatures will cause more heat-related deaths. Studies show that climate change could bring about a 90 to 540% increase in the total heat-related deaths. And it all started when? Air pollution contributes to asthma and other lung diseases. Aren't you sick of it? We should be. Infectious diseases such as malaria require early detection and treatment, but low-income and people of color households are less likely to have access to health care, which makes them more vulnerable to these and other health problems. Climate change will hit the uninsured the hardest. Today, more than 44 million Americans, including more than 11 million children without health insurance. And the uninsured rate for people of color is twice the rate of our counterparts. African American children have more than 6 times the death rate of Caucasians in age groups of 4 years and younger and 15 to 24 years. The economic impacts of climate change and more frequent natural disasters could reach over $175 billion per year in the next 10 years. Climate change risks include increases in the cost of energy and food, which will disproportionately affect poor people. Climate change will reduce discretionary spending for all consumers because prices will rise across the board. But however, friends, low-income families will have to spend even more on food and electricity, which already represents a large portion of their budget. It's getting local. Low-income individuals typically like insurance to replace possessions lost in storms and floods. Less than 30% of renters have renters insurance, compared to over 90% of homeowners who have homeowner insurance. Approximately 10% of people of color in the United States live in coastal regions, which will be vulnerable to the increase of floods and hurricanes. Change the policy, change the world. Just climate policies would build capacity in communities to adapt to climate change impacts. The power to adapt, my friends, depends in part on access to resources, including physical capital, human capital, health, and health care. It has been my task to educate, as I said in the outset of my speaking, the African American clergy on how serious this issue is and how it adversely affects their congregants in a more serious and deadly way than it does any other race in America. We too, last year, had small grants, and we began teaching congregations how to become energy efficient in their houses of God, with the intended long-range purpose of seeing to it that that same mindset would then go from the church to the homes of those parishioners who worship there. Because the more we can do to consume, the more we can do to do less in terms of pollution, overeating, overspending, and so forth, we can make a big difference on the environment. Low-income communities and people of color have less access to resources, such as personal savings, and that is greatly needed if you're going to adapt to any form of climate change. What can you do? Talk about these issues to everyone you meet. Communicate your concerns to your local, state, and national legislators. We have encouraged our clergy and community leaders to begin to write op-eds, write LTEs, pay attention to what's going on in their local communities. Because, my friends, politics is local more than national. Thank you for listening, and I'll be available for questions afterwards.
Great. Thank you so much, Reverend McLean. So we're going to move into question and answer period now. And so if any of you in the audience have a question, you can submit it by going through the control panel in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. There should be a little place to click down and enter in your questions. So go ahead and plug those into us if you haven't already. We do have a few questions. So we'll get started with those. I'm going to actually roll two of them into one here, and this is a question for all of our panelists. Have you found that members of participating churches get involved in sustainability work, or is it more just the church leadership that's mostly involved? So that's one question. And then a related question is, how prevalent are climate deniers in the churches?
Well, I'll go first. Within the African American community, climate deniers are far few and in between. I would say roughly at least 90% or higher of African American faith leaders and congregants believe and know that climate change is real because they see it, they feel it, they experience it.
This is Alexis. I agree with Reverend McLean, and I've found that actually to be the truth in other faith communities as well, that climate change deniers are actually few and far between. And it's mostly what it is a lack of education about what climate change is. And once we have a conversation about the actual science behind it and actually tell the truth, people's opinions change because they've never actually heard anyone stand up in their faith community or stand up in front of them and say, climate change is real, this is the science behind it. And so they've never heard anything but the news, and we all know the news can sometimes be an unfortunate conveyor of information about climate change. And so we actually, here even in Georgia, and I am not just talking about walking into liberal, progressive in Metro Atlanta congregations. I'm talking about across the state. Deniers are few and far between. It also, in terms of the other question about who actually gets involved, is every congregation is different. Every single little personality, I mean, you could have the same denomination in the same town, but every faith community is different. And so we find it really does depend. Whether it's the leadership who is pushing the work or it's the lay members, just the congregation members pushing the work. It's about divining what the personality of that congregation is and making sure that you're addressing the needs of their personality. But it is important to get both involved, because some congregations are top-down leadership and there's nothing you can do about that. And so you have to engage with the leadership, but you also have to engage with the congregation. So it's just about where you start in terms of talking about climate change.
I want to piggyback on what Reverend Alexis said. It's very true, because once you present it to them in a language that they can understand, they've always known it, but they've never thought about it in that vein. But once they begin to connect the dots, they see it. And that was one of the things when the Congressional Black Caucus came to the NCC at that time, which is now Christian Justice Ministries, and when they came to the leaders of the African American denomination and began to ask them, weren't you aware of how serious this was or is among your congregants? They said no, because no one had spoken to them. It was not even on the radar. And the African American faith leaders said to the NCC at that time, frame it in language that our people can understand, in other words, make it real, and I believe it will be accepted. And since we've done that, it has been accepted.
I agree with both Alexis and our other presenter, and I have to say, though, that in North Carolina, we're rather infamous for being climate deniers in that we outlawed sea level rise. I live on the coast, and I wish the folks were right here, right now, today. I have a meeting at church at 2 o'clock that I will not be able to go to because my road is flooded. Sea level rise is very real to me because I live on the water on the coast. And that North Carolina legislature that outlawed us using good science to support planning ahead for sea level rise is not what everyone thinks should have been done. But there are deniers in our state. There's no question about that. I also, what I primarily agree with in the other two comments is that it varies from congregation to congregation, whether it will come from the top down or the bottom up in terms of a requirement to face this issue full face. I think that we need both the clergy speaking out and leading their parishioners, and the parishioners demanding that they hear it from the pulpit.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I agree with that.
Excellent. Okay, next we have a comment and a question. The comment is that this was all wonderful. And the question is, will this webinar be available online? And yes, this webinar will be available online. It will be on SACE's website, cleanenergy.org. And when you go there, you'll see a drop-down menu for multimedia and then a link for the webinar archive. So this webinar will be available online there in coming days and weeks. The next question, and again, I'm going to roll together two similar questions, so you can kind of speak to them as one or separately. Firstly, what political clout do churches have, and by what mechanism is it exerted? Second question, which is kind of similarly related, how does the church get its members to weigh in on public policy decision-making without violating its 501 tax status?
We just had a workshop on that very same topic last Saturday and spent 4 hours answering that question. The way that it works in the 30-second answer is that if you are supporting a position, you're okay. If you're supporting a candidate, you are not okay.
Amen.
So that's the bottom line. You cannot take a position from the pulpit for a candidate, but you can say that climate change is real, and we have a moral responsibility to address it. The churches have political clout. We have seen how it has worked in terms of the right to life and in churches with their voice being heard by the politicians, and this will ultimately become political in terms of what we do. So we must take that initiative to recognize our power and to exercise it.
Chris, as an African American and male, and as an African American pastor of 47 years, the African American church has always used its numbers, its voice to affect policy. And I pray to God that day will never come that we'll stop doing that. I often tell when I'm doing presentations, politicians are the greatest mathematicians that I know. They may not know how to read. I'm not saying this in a disrespectful way. They may not know how to read, but they know how to count. And when those voters turn out in numbers telling them that we do not want something, unless they are just complete idiots, they're not going against their voters. Because without their voters, they are no longer in the Congress, they're no longer in the Senate, they're no longer in the state houses, they're no longer on county and city government boards and offices. So the church first has a moral obligation to do it. And the church has the numbers to do it. And I agree with what our sister from the East Coast of North Carolina said. You cannot tell your congregants, you cannot lead them in supporting a candidate. But if it's issues, you're within your right. And as she's correct, the moral majority has done an excellent job dealing with issues. And that's where the other side has to begin to follow. We have to do the same thing.
And I would also add that it's about education. A lot of congregations are very busy doing the work of actually caring for the people within their congregations. They're concerned with feeding and clothing and caring for their people, and so they don't have the time or the resources to follow the political process in significant ways. And so one of the things that we can do as the environmental community is provide the education necessary. I mean, Gipple makes it very clear that we are not an environmental organization in any way, shape, or form. We are a faith-based organization that engages communities of faith in response to climate change. And so for us, it is about education. It is about utilizing the resources at hand, because most of the time people don't even know what's happening in terms of environmental movements. So that's a big part of it as well.
Great. Okay, here is another one. I'm not an ordained minister, but I'm interested in starting a group at my church as a layperson. What advice would any of the panelists have for lay people interested in starting a creation care group in their congregation from scratch?
I would first ask them to go talk with their pastor. Go to your pastor and present your idea, what you're trying to do, and get his help. Because it would be disrespectful to start a ministry within the church and you have a shepherd who is there by the act of God and by the acceptance of the congregation to be their leader. So you would need to go through him or her first.
I agree. And then offer to be helpful. Don't. My suggestion about that is go to your pastor, say this is what I want to do, and then follow up by using the communication avenues you have at hand within your congregation to gather like minds together. Ask people if they're interested in this ministry, because you can't do it by yourself. And then gather them together and come up with a plan. In the past 10 years, we have learned that the average lifespan of a congregational green team is about 2 years, because you get burned out very quickly pushing up against the walls of your congregation. A lot of times there are roadblocks in your way that you didn't know, you couldn't see coming. And so what we suggest is having not a lot of events, but having some events that have nothing to do with meetings. Don't sit in an air-conditioned room with an agenda, take notes, and have a conversation for an hour. It's boring. I don't like going to meetings even a little bit. And so go outside. There are naturalists within your congregation. There are state parks down the street. There are national parks, but none of them are open. And so go and find something to do outside. Go visit your botanical gardens. Go for a walk. And you'll find that in the conversations and as you're building community, you will not only get other people to come, because as a parent of a young child, I want to go to a meeting that's outside that's a hike because I want my young child to go on the hike. So you can get young families involved. You can get the older people involved who might not necessarily want to come to another meeting. But if you do something outside, you'll not only be refreshed as a community, but you'll build community, and then you'll find like minds. And so, and also the other big thing about that is that pray about it and pray with your community. Do a little bit of worship in whatever tradition you have. Read a reflection, share some scripture, share some prayer time as a community, and pray about what you're doing, I think.
And I might add, even though I work primarily within the African American faith community, our organization is not totally African American. So on our website, we have resources that are available to you that are free of charge to you, that you can go onto our website and download that deal with ministries that deal with creation care for what you're trying to do. Look at our website, creationjustice.org, and you'll be able to see a multitude of periodicals, literature that you can download that will help you and guide you in this process. Or email me, and I'll be glad to get them for you.
I would say the same with North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, and I would also add just one more thing to the brilliant answers that have been given already, and that is that one person really can make a difference. Mm-hmm. One person can be the light. Don't hide it under a bushel. Just be there and let folks know, and you will find the support. I think that, the squeaky wheel, you need to let people know that this is something you care about and go in hand with the resources that you need, which are available to you on the web. Mm-hmm. And if you have an Interfaith Power and Light group in your area, I don't know what state that came from, that would be the way that I would begin.
Okay, let's do, we're more or less out of time. We have more questions than we have time to get to, so let's do a very quick answer to this last one, and then we'll give the floor over to Aaron to wrap us up. But I think this is an important question for some of the groups on the phone. So let's do this one quickly. How do nonprofit conservation organizations who are working on issues reach out to churches and the faith community in general to share information and suggest strategic action?
Well, we have a liaison. That's my function, is to work between the Sierra Club and North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light, and it's just the power of collaboration. Emphasize that. I think that faith voice is the voice that's needing to be heard, and if you can encourage them to speak with you, you'll be heard more in the power circles.
Great. Great. All right. Well, with that, let's turn it over to Aaron Cameron.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to all of our presenters today and everyone on the call for attending today's Southeast Coastal Climate Network webinar. SACE is very excited to host this webinar series, and we would like to thank all of our members on this call and encourage those of you who are not members to please join us today. As Chris mentioned, we were recording this webinar, and it will be posted on our website, cleanenergy.org, by Friday of this week. You will also receive a follow-up email with a link to the page on our website. And again, today's presentation, I would like to thank everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.